Learning our lessons from Detroit City, that is the topic of tonight's Byline. I was house hunting online this morning, and did you know that you can get a 5-bedroom, 2,400 square foot home in Detroit for $20,000? It's true. And at least on the outside, this home looks like it was once a stately place to live. Or see this White House on the right? Yeah? Well, this should tell you something. The fact that that can be had for only $20,000, that should tell you something about the state of Motown. We all know that they have declared bankruptcy. We all know the city is badly run. But seeing a home like this for $20,000 tells you that that's just how bad things have gotten. How much would a home like that go for in your hometown? I can tell you here in Ottawa, or even in my gritty city industrial hometown of Hamilton, Ontario, a home like that, even in a bad neighborhood, would be selling for 10 to 20 times that amount. Detroit is $18 billion in debt. They've run out of money because, well, people have fled the city. From a population of near 2 million people in the 1950s, they're at about 700,000 today. And along the way, the city has rotted itself out. One recent mayor, a former mayor now, Kwame Fitzpatrick, was convicted of fraud and racketeering. He's not alone among Detroit politicians in being crooked. He'd come into office after his mother had been married. He was replaced by his aunt. There's a bit of a family thing going on there. That ain't a healthy democracy. How did Detroit get this way? There's a whole lot of factors, from the movement of manufacturing away from the Rust Belt that lines the U.S. side of the Great Lakes, to the high wages and unaffordable demands of the auto unions, the bad management. Let's face it, the bad management of Detroit's Big Three. All of these things have been part of Detroit's demise, but in the end, they also did it to themselves. The city's citizens kept electing politicians that refused to say no. They kept telling the public that they could spend and spend and spend and never have to cut, until they had to shut down whole neighborhoods, until the fire department couldn't protect the whole city, until the police were taking an hour to respond to a call. The city is $18 billion in debt. That includes $3.5 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. And really, that's the saddest part. People that work their whole lives for the city might see their pension savage because there isn't enough money left. They didn't put enough money into the pension fund to cover all their promises, and now the tax revenue just isn't there to pay for what's left. Those people could be left high and dry, too old to work. They may soon be too poor to pay their bills, all because no one, and I mean no one, was prepared to say no to more spending in the past. When families see the revenues fall, someone gets laid off or gets their hours cut, they generally find ways to cut spending. Not politicians. They like to think that they're better than that. They want to keep spending more. Last week, I was listening to American radio host Mike Broomhead, and his description of what was going on in Motor City was just so well put. Broomhead said, every parent has at some point needed to tell their kids no. You have to say no, and then you feel that pain, sometimes the shame of having to tell your kids, I'm sorry, we can't afford it. But Broomhead said these politicians, they never say no. And that's the problem. His description was bang on. What's happening in Detroit could happen here in Canada as well. In Canada, we have a runaway federal debt, but perhaps worse than that, we have runaway provincial debt. In Ontario, the provincial debt to GDP ratio was 14% back in 1990 before good old Bob Rae and the NDP took over. It went up to 30% by the time he left office. The Mike Harris years saw it come under control, even drop a little bit, but then Dalton McGuinty reacted to the recession in 2008, and it's ballooned up to roughly 38% today, and it's expected to keep going up. Quebec, they're even worse off. In fact, according to numbers crunched by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Quebec's debt and their share of the federal debt would put them at about the same debt level as Spain, one of the EU countries that has been bailed out recently. Ontario's not far behind. Only BC, Saskatchewan, and Alberta are relatively healthy by this measure. What's the problem? What's the problem elsewhere? Well, same as elsewhere. It's governments spending too much, governments promising too much. We're letting our government spend the tax money yet to be earned of our children and grandchildren. We're on the same road as Detroit, and we need to turn around. But that means saying no to an ever-expanding government and saying no to a program for every need and want. It means saying, I can do it by myself, and then doing it, not putting your hand out. If we can't learn to do that in Canada, well, at least we're going to have front row seats for our own demise. And that's the byline.
let's stop and look at this situation. $18 billion in debt. The city's broke. And if we weren't to take this action, to stop and say, let's get things done in a thoughtful, well-organized fashion, the city would continue to go downhill. Enough is enough about Detroit going downhill. This has been going on for 60 years.
Michigan Governor Rick Snyder laying it on the line. Will the people of Detroit, will the people of Michigan listen? And what about our lessons here? Ian Lee, professor of economics at the Sprott School of Business, Carleton University, joins me now. And Ian, you know, you and I have talked about this before in relation to Europe, and now it's hitting closer to home with a major city a lot of Canadians are familiar with. It's, you know, just north of Windsor.
Yes.
We all know about it. And the lesson should come home to roost now.
I completely agree. I listened to your opening comments in the monologue. I thought you just nailed it. You outlined the issue. I think the biggest issue, my only nuance to what you said was, I'm less concerned at the national level. I'm not trying to say I'm not worried at all. I am. But the national government, Canada, the United States, has a printing press. It's called the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve, and so forth. They can literally print money. Provinces and state governments cannot print money, and neither can municipalities. And municipalities are even in greater straitjacket because they do not have the full taxing power under the Constitution of Canada or the United States. They cannot do income taxes on us at the municipal level. They can do property taxes, they can do levies on developers, and fines, basically. So they're much more constrained. And I would argue, Brian, I think this is really important. I think the least checks and balances exist in the sense that we don't scrutinize municipalities as much.
No, we don't.
And so they are been making these wild-eyed, woolly promises across Canada and the United States to public sector unions who have been jacking up the promises. And the unfunded liabilities in Canada and the United States are at the municipal level is very, very worrying.
In politicians, as I was saying earlier, they're always afraid to say no.
Exactly.
And they think that's the compassionate thing. We don't want to be like those hard-edged conservatives and say no. But if you never say no,
that's right.
My mother's in OMERS, the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement Plan. If that thing goes belly up because no one's minding the cookie jar, how compassionate is it to tell her, well, the pension fund is going belly up. You're going to get 50 cents on the dollar that we promised you. That is not compassionate.
I completely agree. In point of fact, you brought up OMERS. OMERS is the Ontario Municipal, for the benefit of the viewers, the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement Fund. They have a $10 billion deficit, an unfunded liability. Their promises are unfunded. They're short $10 billion. And all the municipalities in Ontario make up a part of that. For example, here in Ottawa, we're about the size of Detroit in terms of population. We're about 800,000. There is a $300 million unfunded liability, which is Ottawa's share in OMERS of that deficit. And the OMERS board, or the executive, put forward a proposal to push back the retirement age, very important idea, good idea, and to increase premiums. And the board, the union members on the board voted it down. In other words, they are looking at a $10 billion liability and they don't have a solution for it. So what Detroit, yes, is far worse. And there, by the way, there's about 100 cities in the United States that are in very serious financial difficulty. Big cities, Chicago, Philadelphia, Oakland, I can go on and on. But the Canadian cities are not as bad off, but they're getting there because of this ticking time bomb called the unfunded pension liability, which is going to go black on us.
We have that at the provincial level. We have that at the federal level.
Yes.
You know, that's part of why the feds were saying they needed to be sitting in on the contract talks of the Crown corporations like Canada Post and CBC.
Yes.
That's driving the left nuts right now. But if these promises are continually made, we'll give you this pension, but no money set aside for it, eventually we're left on the hook for it and the money runs out.
CD Howe has done some excellent empirical studies that have been peer-reviewed by experts, including Don Drummond, showing that at the federal level only, this is for federal public servants, MPs, RCMP, military, it's almost $300 billion, $280 billion. That's a third of $1 trillion unfunded liability in the federal pension plan, and that's going to fall on the rest of us across Canada as taxpayers.
That's more money. That is more money than the Fed spend in a year right now.
It's close.
It's just well, it's about 272.
That's right.
So
you're right.
It's more than they spend in a year. Is what they owe for what they haven't set aside.
Right. The scary part.
How do we get out of this? How do we get out of this at any of the level? I think that at a certain point, you've got to just say no, like we all do to our children when our children are saying, "Daddy, can I have dessert while we're out at McDonald's?" Or "Daddy, can I buy this toy?" No, we can't right now. You need to wait.
Brian, I'm glad you asked that question. I really am, because there's a lot of people who say, okay, I'm frustrated, but what can I do? There are concrete solutions. One of them is, Flaherty did it, although he didn't do it enough. He announced in the 2012 budget, pushing back minimum retirement age for a pension in the public service to age 65. The problem was, he grandfathered every living, breathing public servant in Canada. In other words, anybody on the payroll as of December 31, 2012 will be under the old rules. So that rule won't kick in for 35 years.
If they're 25,
they're under the old rules. Now, he should have said, we'll grandfather people that are 5 or 6 or 7 years from retirement, all the rest of you under the new rules. The provinces of Canada, across Canada, should be saying to their own public service and to their municipalities, colleges, universities, school boards, so sorry, we cannot allow you to go at 55 when average life expectancy now is 82. That means we're paying out $50,000 or $60,000 a year, and it's going to fall on millennials, paying it out to people like me who are going to collect. Well, I'm not retiring at 55, by the way. I'm going to go to 70. I want to go to the end. I want to die on the job. But setting that aside, in other words, when you allow people to retire early like that at 55, if they go through to 82, anybody at home can do the math. Take your pension, multiply it by the number of years you're going to live. Statistically, it's to 82. And if you go at 55, it has a huge impact. If you push that back to 65, or 67, even better. That is to say, you are reducing the unfunded liability in the pension plan. And that is a very important thing that governments could do across this country, is push up the minimum retirement age for public servants and the broader public service from 55 to 65 or even 67.
Yeah, those promises of age plus years in, I think those were made, and they made sense when we were talking about guys doing backbreaking labor and starting at 18.
Exactly.
Not people sitting, no offense to you, sitting at a cushy desktop at a university.
I will not deny that.
I just want to point out, though, that what you're advocating for would impact you.
I know.
That's important for people to
remember.
remember.
I have no problem with that.
Email me your thoughts on all of this. byline@sunmedia.ca. What are your worries about heading to Detroit? And by the way, if you don't live in Ontario and Quebec and you think your province is fine, just remember, you're on the hook if one of us goes belly up.